Good evening. This is a special joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen, the School Committee, and the Finance Committee, being Wednesday, January 29th, 2014, just a little after 7, running a little late. I'm blaming the cold weather. Our agenda this evening, we've got really 4 items here, although I'm going to try to simplify this down as best I can before we open things up. We've got a call to order CIP updates as a result of the reconfiguration of the schools for fiscal 2015 through 2019 and financial impacts. Also updates to 10 Swanson Road, currently the Auburn Middle School, the MSBA Statement of Interest, or SOI, for the accelerated repair program of certain schools within the district, and looking beyond 2015 at the new Auburn Middle School, the current Middle School, or Swanson Road, Mary D. Stone, and Julia Bancroft. That's our agenda tonight, and I'm thinking anyways that we're going to go probably for an hour and a half, and we could probably go 4 hours, but that's not the Finance Committee's intent here. We actually have the narrowest and easiest part of why we're all here tonight, and that's basically just to get our capital improvement plan, which I believe goes through 2019, in some sort of reasonable order. We've got a lot of spending that is possibly on the table over those years, and actually it's not limited just to the schools, so let's keep that in mind too as we move through this process. I've spent probably a couple hours over the last few days trying to figure out the best way to start this meeting, and honestly, there's so much information, there are so many open items, and probably 5 or 6 subcommittees that may come out of what's going on with the schools that we're not going to get to all of it tonight. So I'm going to wield a mean gavel, try to keep things focused on trying to get some things started. Don't expect to get much accomplished here tonight, except planning for a next meeting that may not need a joint meeting of all these committees, but we'll get a lot of good dialogue going anyways in terms of taking care of really the school district needs. What I'd like to do at this point, I think, would be to hand it over to Dr. Brunelle. You and I'll say the committees under you are under the schools. Came up with some fantastic information. I know fairly recently, I'm still trying to pour through it. I was out of town for a few days. And I know Rick Ringard and his group came up with a great summary of this also. But I'd like to turn it over to you and move on with this.
As a point of order, should we call the select board and school committee?
I guess we should. So
just to advise everyone, that's, is there anyone recording this meeting that's in attendance? Because this meeting is being recorded. There being none, call the school committee session.
And I'll call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order.
And I'll recall the Finance Committee to order. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jeff.
With your permission, I think it would be easiest, I'm going to head to the podium. We've got some screenshots to help direct the paperwork, and Mr. Gray and Mr. Fahey are going to accompany me. Willingly.
And Dr. Brunelle, I'll let you handle whether you want to take questions on the fly or afterwards.
Okay.
And the same thing for our Board of Selectmen in terms of any comments and questions. And anyone that does have questions, could you try to run them through me anyways, just to keep this organized? Thank you.
So what we prepared in this packet, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to present this information tonight. And I want to thank both Mr. Fahey and Mr. Gray. They spent countless hours looking through the capital improvement programs over the past several years to really try to put together a summary of where we stand currently and to try and lay out a roadmap of where it is being going. Just to preface all of this, you'll remember that over the past several years, and I can only speak to the 6 that I have been here as superintendent, there has been a deliberate intention on the school department's side to reserve spending some of the CIP money. And the reason for that was to wait until we actually had a decision about, first and foremost, when we went to have the Auburn Middle School, and thanks to the generosity of the Auburn residents, they overwhelmingly supported that May. And then secondly, what will we do with the remaining schools in the district? So back in, once they approved in the middle school in May, The decision was brought, or a recommendation, I should say, was brought to the school committee by the Auburn Public Schools Master Plan to recommend our heads that chairs that committee. The recommendation was to utilize the current middle school at 10 Swanson Road to educate the students in grades 3 to 5. So that would be students currently attending in Catholic. Once that decision was made, the master plan team continued their work, and the next recommendation that they made was that one student impact students who are out of the road is then to actually continue to utilize the Catholic Charter School and Brunelle School. And that was after tours took place, rubric was used to score the efficiencies, location abilities. So what we have to present to you tonight, the first section is regarding the CIP. So if I bring, probably first in your content is this document here, which is the 15 through actually the 19 CIPs. And these most recently went to the school committee again on January 22nd for these amendments. And they at some point have Mr. Fagan and share some items. So what we did is went through each of these to see what we anticipated that we would need to spend in each of the schools, recognizing that if all goes well with the rules that we have in the fall of 2015, the Julie Rock and Mary Stone may not be used any longer. So items that you saw, for example, in Julie Rock to do the HVAC system in the American administration area, that no longer will be needed for that school. However, the oil tank upgrades, and we've had a meeting with both Town Manager Jacobsen and CFO workers regarding this. The oil tank upgrades, there's an oil tank in the ground at the bank park that will ultimately need to be removed. So regardless of whether that building remains in control of the school committee or the town, that's an upgrade that actually needs to happen. So we left that note in. Then you can see over on the right, we have said take $30,000, so the balance there remains at 30, and to take $50,000 of that and transfer it to the 10 Swanson Road. We use that terminology rather than the middle school, so as not to confuse with the new middle school project. Also, you see here in the Brunelle School building in blue is adding 2 modular classrooms. It doesn't change the value of this. What we simply did is from the Maryellen Stone School is took the 2 modular classrooms intended to have been installed there once that school is no longer used as an educational facility and moved it up to the Brunelle School. What you see in total in terms of projects down at the bottom here, it was once $1,025,000. Is now $925,000. We need to then continue to the next page. Actually, the amendments on this is actually neutral in terms of any change in costs. We've added some additional costs for the one-to-one iPad initiative that we did in the fall. So the bottom line value remains the same. That kind of sets the process of what it is we did in terms of the 15 to 19, which we will come back to. The next document, you can pull this packet out. It's titled Capital Plan Expanded. Road. Proposed funds remain/transfer. This document, and then the next one to look at is labeled, if you want to put them side by side, the Swanson Road conceptual budget. The Swanson Road conceptual budget, this is actually a budget that has been created by the master plan team, and that's shared by Mr. Hugo. And this outlines conceptually, and then Mr. Davey in more detail. This outlines the major renovations that we anticipate making to the 10 Sullivan Road property to ready it for intermediate grade students. As you can see, the total there currently, and it shifts somewhat as time goes on, and we refine this number, is currently slightly over $1.8 million. The great news is all of these funds are already in CIPs. I'm going to detail that for you. This is not a request to ask for additional funding from the town. What we will need to do is seek approval from the town meeting to reappropriate funding, as I said at the start of this, that had been reserved until decisions were made. I can have you go over what renovations were anticipated in the middle school.
Basically, renovation of the middle school is going to require a configuration of the parking lot. Already existing up that under that rule. Actually, close on that to give us an idea. Feel very comfortable that this number that we showed here off the street, buses in our district, provide enough room for the buses all to work together. So that all came up with this section. The major renovation that we're going to be doing at the middle school in that summer is primarily downstairs cafeteria. But we're going to be doing is expanding that into what used to be a woodshop area. The physical dining area, the square footage is basically going to stay the same. We're basically blowing up the kitchen and giving us added room. Along with that, we're replacing the doors and hardware. We're installing HVAC throughout the building for the classrooms. All the work we've kind of doing over the years anyway. Upgrading that plumbing for what we're going to be doing is we're actually bringing younger children into that building, so it's going to require redistributing all that stuff is been thought out, all that stuff is put together. We're not still very comfortable that we'll follow this up.
Just as a reminder, the master plan consists of 19 individuals from across the community. It's chaired by Rick Henry, but there are also school representatives, parents, and community representatives. And they actually began their work a year ago, December, looking at the schools and trying to make some assessments. What's happened over the spring is we've divided into two subcommittees, the education subcommittee and the existing building. So these recommendations come from the existing building subcommittee, but with the blessing of the education subcommittee. We wanted to make sure that there are enough educational spaces to house grades 3 to 5, and there are, but that there will need to be some research. Many of us have heard the concerns that have been raised about the current middle school property, and the drop-off and pickup, the parking lot that is too small, and Mr. Davey, Mr. Ringer, and the other members of the existing building subcommittee have come up with what we believe is a great plan to address that. So there will be, in general, a facelift, so to speak, done to it in terms of painting, carpeting where it's needed, the bathrooms, as Mr. Davey indicated as well. Also included in your packet, Mr. Ringard was intending to be here this evening, and due to scheduling, was no longer able to do so. So a letter from him is actually also included in your packet. It is titled Property School Building Master Plan Update. It is dated January 27, 2014. And basically encapsulates exactly what it is that Mr. Fahey has just said. Can we include the budget sheet that is highlighted for the party on the screen? And I realize there's a lot of information, so I don't have problem with people when they stop at every place to
That's fine. Actually, I have a question. Actually, just a favor. Could you review the timeline as best you know for schools opening, schools closing, just briefly anyways?
Sure.
Thank you.
Currently, we're on time and on budget in terms of the currently moving of the school project. The substantial completion on that is expected to be July 7th, 2015, with the students moving in at the start of 2015-16 school. There's an awful lot of domino impact on this. The goal right now, we believe that we can keep to this schedule, is to that same summer move the JV and Packagug things, the materials and such, into the current middle school, into 10 Swanson Road. Additionally, it is our hope and our goal to move the Mary D. Stone school program into Packagug. Now, that's an awful lot of moving and coordination that needs to take place. We're comfortable at this time. That's our plan going forward. But there's an awful lot that's going to be predicated on that. But that's our goal. And we think that we can keep it. We actually did, in this packet, include for you some information, and this one is titled Estimated Moving Costs. So we actually looked at, with these three moves that are actually going to be taking place, plus going into the new middle school, what is it going to cost in order to hire movers to do this? So there is an estimated cost in here for that to happen as well. So if we go back to the packet that's titled Capital Plan Expanded, which you had out, what this shows is actually it's the sister document, I suppose, to the one that we just showed, the $1.8+ million, and where those funds are going to come from. So in fiscal 11, there was a remaining, assuming town meeting approves, obviously this requires town meeting approval, we would seek to transfer the remaining balance in the Julie Bancroft CIP to 10 Swanson Road, as we would like to do with Mary D. Stone, and leave what is in the current middle school available for 10 Swanson Road. It breaks it down on this by year, and this was after Mr. Fahey and Mr. Gray went through each item and confirmed the numbers with Mr. Kazanovich. And what you see at the bottom is a $1.849 million. The only issue that we have currently, and we've discussed this with Mr. Kazanovich, is in terms of the bathroom and plumbing upgrades that we'll need, it appears we may be $200,000 short, potentially. Now, back to the sheet that we were just looking at, we do have some money built in for contingencies, so if those are not needed, those could finish funding this amount here.
Dr. Brunelle, a question?
Sure.
You or to Ed, actually, regarding the capital plan expended, proposed funds to remain or transferred. These are all prior year CIPs. Have those funds actually been raised or earmarked only?
Can you direct me to which document you're on?
Yeah, the capital plan expanded,
Okay.
10 Swanson Road. The 1.849 million, most of those are talking to prior year CIPs.
Correct.
Have those monies already been bonded out, or are they just earmarked at this point in time?
They have been bonded.
They've been bonded, okay. Thank you.
Correct? Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Following in that packet, so this really is the summary cover sheet here. If you go to each subsequent page after that, it actually breaks it down by fiscal year. It talks about each school that has any remaining funds and what the plan is to do with those funds. So for example, at the Packagug School, the original budget was $125,500.
Projects completed to date, and they're noted there, total $66,984.24, leaving a balance of just over $58,500. What is to be completed, and anything noted in red, is work that is anticipated and planned to be completed in the spring or summer of 2014. So at Packagug School is to refurbish the bathrooms there and ensure that they are ADA compliant, and that would consume the remaining balance in that account. Staying on that same page, for Auburn Middle School, the original budget was $165,000. Nearly $135,000 has been spent on the boiler replacement, the HVAC, carpet, and technology, leaving a balance of just over $30,000. And it's our intention to use that money, it's marked in red, indicating for the summer of 14 to prepare work, and that's actually the design work for the HVA system at the 10 Swanson Road property. And then each page thereafter, and I'm actually going to continue to just walk you through this until we get one that shows in blue. So in the 0809 CIP, this has school rehab district-wide. The original budget was almost $362,000. $215,000 has been spent on track resurfacing, HVAC at the high school, carpeting district-wide, and boiler conversion at the middle school, leaving a balance of $146,000. Work to be completed, the lighting upgrade at the high school gym will cost $75,000, and that will happen this summer. And the other portion will be used to match MSBA funds for a roof replacement. If you'll recall, both school committee and members of the Board of Selectmen, this is in reference to what you voted on, school committee on the 22nd and Board of Selectmen on the 27th, the statement of interests applications that we intend to submit to MSBA. The MSBA has an accelerated repair program. I don't know that I have this up here for you, but it is this document here. It's titled Capital Plan Expanded MSBA Proposed SOI Accelerated Repair Program Submittal. And that summarizes what we hope to accomplish. The reason for submitting this SOI is because we are trying to seek potentially approximately 50% reimbursement from the MSBA on these projects that we already have planned to do, thus saving money for the town or allowing us to reappropriate that to make additional repairs or improvements to the remaining schools in the district. So we see this as a very fiscally responsible process in which we're engaging.
We have a question here from Mr. Holstrom.
One quick question through Kevin here. So I guess what you're telling us is you've got a project planned with monies attached. Now we have the SOI, which is that application we processed. Optimistically, if we get the 50% back, we can take 50% of the costs of the project and put it back in our pockets for whatever the town needs for reappropriation. Am I seeing that?
The value that we have in our CIP is considered our portion towards the project.
Okay.
So the savings would be, if the value was, say, $200,000, and our portion through our capital is $100,000, then it would be 50% back. So that could be either the cost that we actually estimate might be low, so that might be a difference, or if we do not use it, we feel we can absorb back into the Auburn Middle School, or actually return back to the town.
Okay. I guess what I'm looking for, and I'm sure the people at home are looking for, is what additional costs could there be for the residents of the town for this project if we don't realize that application process and we receive the 50%. I guess it may be a little bit too early for that, because I know that the project is being estimated right now, so we're not really sure, but I think that'll be a question that's going to be asked down the road, is how much is it going to actually cost above and beyond the capital improvement that we've already appropriated?
Sure. And I think it is true that it's probably a question that we can't answer yet. But one of the challenges, and I think it's a great plan to have a 5-year CIP plan, but 5 years ago when we tried to project what it would cost to replace a roof on a school, for example, it's the best guesstimate that we have at the time. We don't go out and it bids. So, as Mr. Fahey said, if it could be that our original estimates were too low, so we may need that money, or if there is money remaining, it could either, whether it was needed in one of the other schools or return to the town. Our goal at the beginning of this was to try and not come back to the town to seek additional funding. That was our goal. And I think through all of these documents, it demonstrates that we believe right now, but for that $200,000 that I think we'll be able to work out, that we should be successful in doing that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, question?
And there's a question.
So my question is, we're going to apply, of course, to the state to seek reimbursement on some of the costs here, on the ones that I guess will apply to energy, conservation and things. So are these numbers that you're showing us prior to any reimbursement we might get for the state, or are you, when you're giving us these numbers, are you assuming that the state's going to reimburse us, so you're showing us the lower figure? For instance, on the Swanson Road budget.
Right.
This is what we have available, like if we look at the Swanson Road, we have available in our current CIP, $71,000. We basically doubled that for this statement of interest. Now, the proposals might come back, and they might come back with $400,000 in order to do the roof. Therefore, it would require us to look elsewhere in our CIP to capture that, or perhaps do the roof in sections instead of the whole job. So the whole idea is this, to make it attractive for the MSBA, is to actually see that we do have matching funds to support the project versus not showing anything in that column, where there's so many communities out there that will be applying for this accelerated program. We felt that by at least capturing what we have in our CIP would make it very attractive.
I think I need to better understand this as well. So out of the $1.8 million earmarked in Mr. Ringard's letter, if the statement of interest do not get approved, is this 1.8 million go up to, let's say, 2 million, or does it, if it gets approved, it comes down to 1.6?
Actually, Mr. Ringard's listing here is outside of the statement of interest. This listing that we showed you, the 10s, the Swanson Road Conceptual, is for the current middle school only. The statement of interest were for Packagug, Bryn Mawr, and 10 Swanson Road for projects outside of those listed here. The current middle school.
Correct, but you have $1.8 million identified for improvements at the point.
Correct.
So statement
Sure. Statement of interest does not apply to the work from the master team.
okay, so it's not part of
It's not part of it, it's completely separate.
So for example, if we stay with the document, if we scroll down to, so if in that same packet, the next year is the fiscal 10 budget. And as you can see there, work that we anticipate doing this summer, noted in red, are replacing the sinks and valves at Packagug and some energy management work at Bryn Mawr School, along with the other items noted there. Again, put towards the match for MSBA. But the following year, in fiscal 11, what you see there, where it says Julia Bancroft School, started with a balance of $235,000 in the original budget. Nearly $212,000 was spent for the boiler conversion to gas, leaving a balance of $23,300. So anywhere noted in blue as there means that we're looking to transfer that balance from Julia Bancroft to the 10 Swanson Road, and that goes back to the cover page, which is the summary. So throughout this document, this packet, what it will total is that which was on the front page, which is actually $1,649,356.18. I apologize for all the paper. We wanted to provide you with all of the details on every project that had been done, those that had not been, and how we planned to use it. So I appreciate that it may be confusing. So if you have questions, we've been working on this, especially Mr. Fahey and Mr. Gray, for some time.
Kevin?
Mr. Hussey.
Oh. Numbers against small.
Just so we're clear, and I think I am, with questions I've asked a few times now. Everything that's budgeted through CIP is going to cover all of the estimates that we have for construction. But we're not seeking any money outside of that unless the estimates go higher or there's unforeseen circumstances.
Correct. The only item is that question that we discussed with Mr. Kazanovich, with Mr. Ringard and myself, Mr. Fahey, is that $200,000 we may be short regarding bathroom work at 10 Swanson Road, but if the contingencies that we have set aside, if those aren't needed, we may be able to cover that. Everything else listed here is reappropriating CIP money from 2010 to 2014, and will cover the repairs that we believe we need at 10 Swanson Road, which is the current middle school.
Just a follow-up question to that. If reappropriation has to take place, when will it take place? When will we be able to have those figures so that we can sit down and say, you know what, we've actually got to move, we got to reappropriate the CIP?
The plan would be to bring those to town meeting for this spring.
That's ambitious. Thank you.
Question, Jim?
Kevin, through you, I'm just kind of looking at the whole 5-year plan, and so really, 2015, it's a wash as far as CIP goes. All money that had been planned to be spent will be spent. 2016 is a savings of $140,000. Has that been earmarked for anything else, or is that just savings for that
Those
year?
are, so to the 15 through 19 CIPs, these are amendments that are voted by school committees. So the 16, that reduction that you see there is a reduction in the request from the school department. So rather than 1.25 million, it's 1.11 million.
Okay, and moving on, 2017 is a wash.
Correct?
And 2018, that's the first year that there's any significant savings as far as the CIP with the consolidation of the schools.
Correct.
About 324,000?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, for the sake of keeping this somewhat organized, and Dr. Brunelle, I know you and Joe are trying to do the best you can with a lot of paper here anyways. Let's, just for the moment anyways, limit questions on past CIP, then we'll talk about future CIP, and then a couple other areas I wanted to touch on while we're going through this, and presentation's been excellent thus far.
Okay.
So any other questions on past CIP? What else? I'll say the school committee is voted, I believe, to request in terms of changes which have to go before town meeting. I'm assuming there are no limitations to these recommended changes, whether they're equipment and/or CIP within that. Do we have any problems with that, Ed?
I think the only consideration that the town would be concerned with is the life expectancy of these items. When they're originally approved by bond council, there is a filing of disclosure on life expectancy, and our debt is structured based upon that life expectancy. So I think bond council would have to review it. We don't anticipate there to be any problems because they're being used for like purposes. I think in most cases, the life expectancy would be equivalent to the capital that was originally approved anyway.
Okay.
So we won't borrow for a 10-year period. The life expectancy of these changes would exceed, it would be at least 10 years, so it wouldn't be, that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay. So in essence, we're doing our darndest to flat fund moving around and closing a couple of schools, and also upgrading, maybe a little accelerated upgrading if we're lucky, the existing elementary schools, that being Packagug and Bryn Mawr.
Correct.
As we stand right now on that. Is that kind of clear to everyone? I know we have a $200,000 maybe question mark, which to me sounds like small money in the bigger scheme of really touching this many schools, 3? No, 5, something like that?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Question?
Is it appropriate to ask now about the 2 schools that are like out there?
If there aren't any other questions on the, I'll say the past CIP that's been bonded out, yeah, let's open it up to future CIP, and also let's jump into reuse or thoughts on what we're going to do on that. So,
By moving money from Julia Bancroft and Mary D. Stone, I haven't heard, and that might just be that I haven't heard, has the school committee or the master plan committee made a recommendation of what is to happen to those 2 buildings? Will they become surplus and turned over to the town? Or does the school department see a future school use for them?
So the master plan team did make a recommendation to the school committee, which was unanimously accepted, which is to keep as educational facilities the Packagug School and the Bryn Mawr School. What has not yet been decided or discussed yet by school committee, and feel free to interject, is at what time the Mary D. and Julia Bancroft would be deemed surplus, that we no longer need them. And quite honestly, the reason for that is because we're still 18 months away from the opening, and we just want to make sure that all of those moves take place in that summer, that we don't want to deem them or turn them back over to the town, if that's the desire of the school committee. But they have voted to keep only as elementary schools Packagug and Bryn Mawr School.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is we're reappropriating money that was set aside for those 2 buildings, and that's fine. But 18 months from now, I want to know if the school department, I don't care if you've surplused it now, is it the intention to surplus those buildings, or is it the intention, or do you see a scenario where you would be coming back to the town asking to reuse those buildings for some other school purpose? Because I think that's a question that, as a taxpayer, I want to know.
Right.
I would say to you that in my thought process is that they would be turned over to the town, that there wouldn't be a need for the school department to have those buildings, and then the reuse would then fall on the town if they wanted to either utilize that for other use or to sell the properties.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And I...
Can I just clarify? I'm sorry. Can I just clarify? We have not had that discussion as a committee, so I think what Mr. Lori is saying is what he thinks probably will happen.
That's my opinion.
Okay.
Correct.
Then I'm going to interject, jump in front of Dr. Brunelle. Given that it's I would say at least as likely that those properties be turned over to the town as kept by the schools for whatever unknown use at this point in time. Given the aggressive timetable for really turning the lights off in those buildings, we may even be behind schedule right now in terms of thoughts and what we're going to do with those. Because I tell you what, we're going to have a lot of disagreements, I think, not necessarily amongst this crowd, but the town in terms of what they really want to do. Public land is very valuable, but is it so valuable versus turning it over and getting that off our books? Those discussions should be happening sooner rather than later. Now, that's outside the purview of the Finance Committee, but as a resident of the town, I would want discussions to start on that immediately. By the way, that may not be the school committee's responsibility, and it could fall onto town administration to start forming a committee and say, in the event of these buildings coming offline in 15 or 16 or even 17, do we have a plan in place that'll minimize our vacancy expenses, our concerns on vandalism, et cetera, and get our best value for the dollar for those properties. That's part of the reason why I also wanted these groups here together tonight. We need to start thinking a couple of years down the line on those buildings that are maybe moving out of the town's coffers. Dr. Brunelle?
I'm actually happy to report that Town Manager Jacobsen and I have had some very preliminary discussions about the process that would happen should and if the school committee deems those as surplus and what the process is that goes through. But we also, as part of your packet, put together some information regarding Julia Bancroft and Mary D. Because I think it's fair to say that until a decision is made, and if all of those things happen, there are still going to be some costs incurred in terms of minimal lights, heat, water, to make sure that they are secured facilities in terms of security system, fire monitoring, minimal charges for telephones. So we did actually do some projections in terms of what we think that may cost, just as something to let everyone know that we are trying to think down the road. And again, those decisions have not yet been made. And honestly, I hesitate to make a recommendation to the school committee today to make such a decision until we're certain that the new middle school opens on time, and I'm confident it will. That JB and Packagug get transferred to Swanson Road, that Mary D gets transferred to Packagug. It's just an awful lot that needs to happen. But the school committee is giving that thought already.
And I would add to that, recommend to Ms. Jacobsen, strongly recommend that a committee be formed that isn't part of the school department or school committee in the event that it becomes offline from the schools. It's not a responsibility, not part of your budget. Therefore, the town can move aggressively to take advantage of whatever opportunities or best uses for those facilities. We have some other, I'll say, aging facilities in the town, and this is the time, I think, to be looking at that, because talk is cheap right now. It's going to get more expensive as we move forward. Dr. Brunelle, if you want to continue, talk about future CIP.
Sure. So in terms of the future CIPs, the 15 CIP we had gone through, and as Mr. Bonifiglio had said, the 15 CIP is cost neutral. There's no change to that, other than some reappropriations that the school committee has supported. In FY16, you can see that again we went through the same general procedure, looking at Julia Bancroft and Mary D, no longer utilizing or needing those projects. Because we were looking to install the modular classrooms at Bryn Mawr in the 15, we've removed that from 16 and replaced it with window replacements. I think there's, in general, one statement I feel comfortable making is that we're going to have, thanks to the generosity of the taxpayers, we have a beautiful new high school. We will soon have a beautiful new middle school. We will, on the books, have a current middle school, which will be an intermediate school that's 60 plus or 60 or so years old. The Packagug School, the original building, is almost 90 years old. And the Bryn Mawr School is in 1948, so 65 by the time opens, 70 years old. So there are costs associated, and a credit to Mr. Fahey's, the yeoman's work that he does and his team in terms of keeping them updated. There are costs in order to do so. And I think we've been able to, in a very fiscally responsible manner, do that and keep them safe for our students and educationally appropriate. So you do see that there is a reduction in the FY16 CIP of $140,000. The FY17 CIP was probably one of the smallest ones that had been put in for at least, I'm going to guess, the past 8 or 10 years. So that one does remain cost neutral. And, excuse me, that was 17. And then the 18 CIP, that is where the most dramatic drop is realized. Over 300,000, 324,000, I believe. And then in the FY19 CIP, when this was drafted, the school committee had already taken their vote to keep only Packagug and Packagug and Bryn Mawr, along with 10 Swanson Road, the new middle school and the high school, as educational facilities. So you see that reflected in here. There are no projects recommended for Julie Bancroft or Mary D. Stone. With that CIP value at 465 being almost a third of what it was in 15. The other documents that I believe were included in your packet, if I can find them here, it outlines work that we intend to do this summer. And again, those were those projects noted in red on the capital plan expanded packet that you received. And it is our hope that those would be supported in transfers by town meeting in recognition that over the past several years, there has been a deliberate attempt to reserve funding, and rather than put it into a building that may eventually not be used as an educational facility, to save it for once those determinations were made. So we're hopeful that those will be approved.
Question from Ms. Solstrom.
Going back to the page that says fiscal year 2015,
Okay.
The last column on the right where it says amendment,
Yes.
3/4 of the way down the page, where does that $280,000 come from? I don't understand.
Okay.
Less of this. This can be 2050.
So basically what we did here is, if you look, it should be the difference between this first column here in FY15, those amounts, and the amended amounts. So in fact, for Bryn Mawr School, it was originally $115,000. What we've added is the installation of 2 modular classrooms, so that brings the amended amount to $390,000. If you then subtract, so that's actually an addition of $275,000.
Oh,
But if you,
okay, I get it.
Okay.
All right, I
Okay.
understand, okay.
Yep.
Any other questions on the CIP at this time? A lot to digest here, I know. Like I said, I only had a chance to look at it today. I do commend the school department, including Mr. Fahey, certainly on putting together a pretty comprehensive and forward-looking plan, which obviously started a few years ago or more in terms of what we're trying to do here. I also commend the school committee and the school department for, in some crazy way, really trying to touch all of the remaining school facilities in some positive ways. New students are coming in. That's, I hope we can pull this off, which would be fantastic. And certainly keeping to a timeline is probably going to be the toughest part of this. So there's a couple of subcommittees I think that need to be at least discussed by some management here from the Board of Selectmen in terms of reuse of expected facilities that have come offline. I know there's been some talk about even what's the best place, or with all apologies, should we be keeping central administration where it is right now, and what to do with that facility. So I know town manager will be likely encompassing at least discussions of really all our facilities, certainly the older ones, in terms of whether these properties may be good for reuse for municipal. Do we need another park here or there? I'm not too sure about that. And I think our most sensitive building will probably be an appropriate reuse in Mary D. Stone, where it's stuck dead in the middle of a pretty dense neighborhood. So we're going to need some people to step up with some opinions and some, say, collegial banter in terms of trying to figure this out. And I think these committees should get formed sooner rather than later. It's outside of our Finance Committee purview, outside of once a year, that we're going to say, hey, look, you're throwing around $250,000 in CIP from one building to another. You know what? We need to have a smarter plan and stick with it. So those kind of issues we don't want to deal with this year or next year. And they're hard decisions to make between town administration, Board of Selectmen, and school committee. So hopefully we can all come together actually fairly quickly. We don't think we're going to get a perfect CIP in the next 5 weeks. That's going to cover 17 and 18 and 2019. But we should have a pretty darn good plan that's going to cover 2016 and maybe even 2017, assuming we can keep to these schedules. They're tight schedules, and if we've got to keep an elementary school open for an extra year, I know you want to avoid moving students during the year.
Absolutely.
I just don't see any need for that,
Right.
especially if there's more rehab that needs to be done.
Right.
Do you have any kind of time frame on when the state will get back to you regarding the grant request?
Those statement of interests are due on February 14th, and I believe sometime in April. We just, April or May timeframe we should hear.
Sounds like just like the governor's budget or approved the budget, so that'll be a summertime kind of thing, which I know is only going to take more hair off of Joe's head. Are there any other questions or comments on this? Comments, please?
Through the chair, thank you. I just also wanted to reiterate what Maryellen had mentioned earlier, a couple things. She and I have had a couple of preliminary discussions about the maintenance and repair and ongoing ability to keep those buildings functional if and when they become declared surplus by the school committee, because we want to make sure that they would, for whatever remaining useful life they have, whatever that decision is made, they've still got to be maintained properly. So we briefly just talked about the fact that we would sit down and enter into an agreement that would be in writing on how that would take place. The second thing is, Ed, Kevin, over to myself, as well as all the department heads, I've had several meetings over the last 6-8 months about putting together, first we've had some internal discussions, but about putting together a committee to look at all of the municipal facilities, not just what to do with these schools, but we have to look at the broad picture of all the facilities in town. What do they need for maintenance? What do they need for repair? What is going to need to be replaced? What is potentially underutilized? What is going to be vacant? And how are all these going to integrate with each other? So it's a huge puzzle with a lot of different pieces that need to be looked at. And the school, these two schools are potentially part of that, depending on what the decision is of the school committee, but it all has to be looked at holistically, because we've got to look at what are some of our existing facilities costing us. Is it worth it to keep pumping money into those facilities, or is there a better use for a particular building and combining it maybe into another vacant facility? So it's really looking at all of those municipal facilities. We actually last year had tried to put money into the bond bill at the state level to get funding for some type of a broader feasibility study that wasn't feasible last year. We're going to see if we can get that again this year, at least to try to start looking from the state level at a master plan for middle school facilities.
Excellent. Yeah, once again, the Finance Committee scope is limited on this, so it's easy for us to kind of do this and say, see you next year on it. But we're all residents of the town. We all pay taxes to the town. And I know nobody here is going to want to pay $50, $100, $200 to make sure no one's throwing rocks through the windows of Julie Bancroft. I spent 6 of the best years of my life there, or 7. And it's in a nice neighborhood too. So once again, we've got all sorts of options on these pieces of property. I wouldn't necessarily say the buildings themselves. And it's going to take a long time for most of the residents, including town meeting, to come to an agreement on it. It's not like deciding on a high school. Hopefully it's more like deciding on a middle school. But we'll need to do it with as much fiscal conservatism as we can. And if that means basically selling some properties commercially, I know we hate to do that, that may be a best option for us, depending on, I think as Julie said and Dr. Brunelle said, we've got dominoes here in terms of the effect on several facilities, school and non-school in town. I just would urge town administration to make an assumption that those buildings are going to come offline off the schools, and if they come up with a better use for them, then at least we were down the path to try to come up with another use for them, so we're not wasting our time. Any final comments from anyone else?
No, I think you're exactly right with what you're saying. You're kind of bringing everybody on board sooner than later. I think even beyond these committees, I think to put it forth to the planning committees and building inspectors, building services, whatever the current name of it is, but I think down the road, those are all people that are going to be affected by this. And I'm not saying that they need to be overly concerned right now, but it is going to be on their lap. As you said, it could be, these properties could be commercial, and just to have in the back of their minds what they might be up against. Really, it's all going to hit at once we make a move.
And I'll remind everyone here that this town, and it's nothing to do with current administration or current school committee, in the past has done an absolutely lousy job with land taking, land selling, and that kind of thing. Anytime we look back on parcels of land that we've sold or not sold, we've not done a very good job with it. Only in the recent past have we done a really good job of taking care of town assets and really strategically placing town assets, school and municipal, for future use. So hopefully we'll keep that all in mind and start moving forward with this. I don't believe we have an overall town municipal planning committee, do we, in terms of reuse on that?
No, there was not.
I know there have been discussions on one at one point in time. The last thing to keep in mind, and this is something that is important to the Finance Committee, is we are resolved to, in general, reduce our CIP, our annual CIP, as quickly and as much as possible to a reasonable level. Where our bond rating has actually been negatively affected because we do a fair amount of borrowing. For an otherwise healthy town, it's made us scratch our head in some phone conferences we've had with our investment services, but they say, yeah, your CIP in general is too high. We're using the credit card too much. And when we're using the credit card too much, we're paying too much interest. So those are things that we need to keep in mind as we move forward with reuse or whatever we're doing with these schools. And with that, if there isn't any other comments, I'll accept, I guess, several motions from every committee to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
All in favor?
It is a vote.
We're adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Kevin.